Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our webinar this morning, Making Product Reviews More Effective. My name's Andrew Bailey. I work in the Learning and Development Department of the Institution of Mechanical Engineers. I'm here to moderate this webinar, which is going to be delivered by Harvey Leach, our content specialist. I'm going to make sure that I continue to monitor the chat that's coming in so that Harvey has a clear run at working through the slides, the presentation, and we're going to do our level best to make sure that you get some really good responses to the queries that you've got in your minds, and also we'll try and share some of the great feedback that you're putting there at this moment in time. What we want to do is help us all understand how to hold reviews that add value. What we're looking to do is get to market with either a product or service quicker, make sure that the quality improves every time, and make sure that people feel good about participating in these design reviews. I've seen already some comments coming through talking about form-filling exercises, talking about egos being present, and that really is the type of thing that we want to try and avoid. You're already starting to use the chat box. You can talk to all of us by making sure you select all participants. If you just want to talk to Harvey, host and presenter, you can get through to us at the head office, and of course the presenter's Harvey. Anything that you think about, please type it in the chat box. We'll make sure that we pick them up and we'll do our level best to talk to you. This is the run. It's going to take us around 50 to 55 minutes to deliver. So firstly, thank you for giving up your time. We appreciate, depending on where you are, it might be lunchtime in the United Kingdom and some parts of Western Europe, but I've seen people coming in from Australia, from America as well. So thank you for giving up your time at whatever time of day you're at. This is the program that we're going to take. It's a step-by-step approach. We'll go back to this list as Harvey goes through. And now that's a really good opportunity to give you a shot of myself on the right-hand side there. You can see that you can now see both of us, although neither of us, I'm afraid, are using cameras at this moment in time, but they're pretty decent likenesses, I can assure you. So I've worked for the institution in the Learning and Development Department for around about 7 or 8 years now. I talk to a great number of the businesses that you've worked for on their training needs, and we try and find solutions for you. Harvey is very, very much our content specialist, and I'm going to hand over to him straight away now to not only just introduce himself, but also to take you through the presentation that he's put together. Here we are, Harvey.
Fantastic. Thank you, Andrew. And hello from me to everybody out there, whatever time of day it is for you. For me, it's afternoon here in Oxford. And just before we start, to give you a brief overview of my background, I'm an engineer by training. Spent a little bit over 25 years in the UK automotive industry in what was variously British Leyland, Rover Group, BMW Group, in a variety of roles. Started in research for a while, into product development. After that, some time in production control strategy, a couple of years in BMW HQ in Munich, and finally at the Mini Factory in Oxford, where I was involved in the production strategy for the second generation new Mini, a lot of which was to ensure that we got input from the factory into the early stages of the design work for that project, so that the new car would be a bit easier and cheaper to build than the previous one. So you could say I've kind of worked through all these different stages of product development and seen how all this stuff comes together, and the importance of having the right sort of review at the right time and getting all the key inputs. So I'm coming very much from that perspective. The confession I make when I run courses on this topic is I've never actually been a designer, but I've been very much heavily involved in the design and development process and with designers. So I'm looking at it very much from that whole project perspective. And to say that the material for today's webinar actually comes from some real experience we had with one particular client last year. They approached us because they were looking to make their design reviews more effective and couldn't find any other training material available in the UK. So we put together some stuff for them, And reviewing that afterwards, we thought there was some stuff of real value that might be of benefit to the wider engineering community out there. And hence the idea for this webinar and the upcoming open course on design reviews that comes up next month. So today's really about a few high spots. I'm not going to attempt to do a comprehensive overview of the whole topic in the 45 minutes or so we've got. You know, in terms of the basic structure and mechanics of a review, I think the pretty standard on that covers that very well. So if you're not familiar with that, do get access to a copy, and that will give you a lot about the structure and mechanics. And what I'm going to do today is pick up what I think are some of the sort of key success factors that make reviews deliver. And I noticed looking at the comment boxes that there are clearly a lot of common themes out there in terms of where reviews don't perhaps work as well as we would like to. So before we get into the detail of that, let's just clarify what we're talking about here when we mean a review. You know, and I think we can talk about a whole range of reviews. You know, so before we think about what we for, let's think about which ones we're talking about. So it could be very early stuff on reviews of requirements. We could be talking design reviews. We could be talking readiness reviews, whether that's technology, manufacturing, production, whatever type of readiness reviews we're talking about. And also to think about gate events, because in many senses, they're also a different type of review. And some of the attributes of them, while in some ways can be very different, in other ways can be very much the same. So back to the question we asked in the slide that was up while you were waiting. How do you feel, or how do you think your colleagues feel about attending a review? Yeah, and that, you know, for me, that's a good way to get a handle on what you think the purpose is. You know, what do you think reviews are there for, and so on. And some of the stuff that comes next has come out of conversations I've had with a number of organisations about how reviews seem to be experienced in their context. So please continue to add to the comments box, and Andrew will pick stuff up and we can come back to it later. But here's some common ones. The first one that we sort of end up talking about is, do you feel like you're there to be judged? If you're there as the presenter, if you're someone who's done your design and you're putting it up for review, do you feel like you're there to be scoring? I was really tempted to add a picture of Craig Revel-Horwood here, but I resisted. And I wonder what's going on there. Is it that people start to see the review as a threat or a challenge to their professional competence? Maybe that they're maybe not doing a good enough job, so other people have to check up on you. Or maybe if you're there as a reviewer, you feel like you're in the Craig position, the judging position, if you like, and that your job is to give the presenters a score. You know, what's the score out of 10 for their design? And my guess is, if that's your perception, then that might make people feel really uncomfortable about the review process, and therefore not get the best out of it. So, you know, just maybe spend a minute or so for yourself. Just think about if that's the attitude of the people presenting or reviewing, what sort of behaviours and value does that actually generate?
Hi Harvey, I'm trying to keep pace with some really good information that's dropping into the chat box, but I've picked a few things up. Just the one which is disturbing, and I know it's completely true, that often time gates can sort of get blundered through without deliverables actually have been achieved, because the time, the end time that we've got to have this finished is approaching more rapidly than we're actually managing to do the work. There's another, I think, classic issue on a great many of topics where we're either presenting or talking to other team members or even customers, that there's too much detail that is actually put together, actually filtering through what needs to be seen, filtering through what needs to be heard is often quite difficult. And as a safety measure, and I include myself in this, as a safety measure, you often throw the kitchen sink at it in an effort to make sure that you don't miss anything. And also something that's come through on a couple of occasions is this lack of consistency, that standards are not quite there, that process isn't quite there either. So they're the sort of things that that I'm seeing at the moment. Commercial pressure, pushing things through gates before we're ready, far too much detail. Interesting, detail is very difficult to wade through to get the priorities, but it's detail that takes up time if you're pushing through there. And also a lack of consistency.
Yeah, I mean, and I think those are really common themes, Andrew. I mean, even within the one organisation that we worked with, this lack of consistency came out because different projects with different project leaders were approaching the topic of the design review and gate reviews in different ways. And one of the things that I know they're working on internally, of which our work with them is part, is to really drive that greater consistency within their own process. Because I think that takes me neatly on to sort of like the second how do people feel about it topic, which is, you know, it just becomes a box ticking exercise. And I think I saw something on that in a couple of the comments as people were signing in. You know, so it's something that just has to be done. It's a necessary step, and people don't really see that it adds value. And of course, if people are not seeing that it adds value, then are they going to put the effort in terms of presenting, in terms of preparing for the review, whether they're a presenter or a reviewer? People turn up at the review wondering, why are they really there if we're just there to tick boxes? And without that clarity, people come poorly prepared, or maybe don't even bother showing up at all. You know, so again, we're, you know, with the wrong perception, we're not really coming to the review with the right preparation and the right sense of the value we get out of it. Because an alternative perspective could really be that design reviews are a valuable part of helping us to make products better, of delivering them on time. Because I'm very conscious of the time pressure that a lot of engineers and development people feel. It's always like we're always trying to go too quickly. And people talk about commercial pressures, but I think the one thing I learned over sort of 30 odd years in the car industry is those commercial pressures are real. You know, that you know, the launch date is there for a reason, and the time is real. And our challenge as engineering teams, as product development teams, is to improve our process so that we can actually hit that timing in a way that makes us feel like we're in control, and we're not always chasing behind and having to respond to that pressure before we are ready. And that, I guess, is a topic could almost be a whole webinar on itself, and is something we cover in some of the product lifecycle courses on the open program. So, you know, mindset, really important starting point. Are we ensuring that people come along with the right mindset? You know, are they there to be judged, to judge, box tick, or are we really seeing it as valuable? And what can we do to encourage that? So to move on, for those of you who attended the last webinar that I did about 18 months ago, you'll have seen this picture before. But what I want to do is just stand back and spend a minute, having mentioned the time pressure thing, and see reviews in their context. And this picture makes the point that while the cost of design and development work on a product can be a relatively small percentage of the total lifetime cost of that product, the potential of that design development work that's carried out in the early phases of a product's life to influence the cost of the product, the quality of the product, while there's still a huge amount of design freedom, is many, many times the cost of that engineering effort. And one of our key challenges in terms of reducing the time to get products to market, improving quality, is to make the most of that design freedom, and not leave it until we get a lot of problems as we get nearer into production. Because we get to this sort of time curve where actually the closer we get to production, it feels like we have to do more and more work in less and less and less time to manage our way out of a crisis. And a sort of fundamental philosophy of my experiences of doing this sort of thing over the last 30, 40 years is the importance, but yet still the difficulty of getting much more effective effort up front, so that actually we don't get that huge time pressure and rush to fix things as we get nearer and nearer to production. Because, what am I going to say? Yeah, some people will be sitting there now saying that is a really nice ideal, but we never get there. And I don't underestimate the scope and scale of the challenge there. But I equally know through, intensive and focused effort and learning from other organisations that do this sort of thing really well, that huge progress can be made, and that we significantly reduced the effort that was required at launch in terms of design changes that allowed our production colleagues the time to really mature the quality of the product to meet customer expectations. And it comes from this fundamental principle that evolved out of study by a lot of researchers, a key guy called Jeff Likert in particular, who's written these books on the Toyota way, that said it's important to take time to build consensus around decisions in the early stages, to think of all the options that we have, so that we are then in a position to implement rapidly without lots of product change. So our principle in terms of any type of review is to be an enabler for that idea. That if we have a process that leads up to and conducts effective reviews, then we're in much better shape to execute the subsequent stages of a project in a much shorter timescale.
Harvey, could I just drop in here? I just wanted to pick up on something. Thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but James Waldron, I think, has picked on something that might help us start to understand what a decent review can look like. James's comment was, creating material for the review seems to be the norm, rather than using a review to see the data that you create in your everyday work. And a couple of slides ago, you showed us those awful peaks of crisis and effort. Yeah. And I think James's comment struck me that, the review meeting itself can create those peaks and troughs, not just the launch. And I do think that James is right. If you're not able to walk into a review meeting with a record of the work that you have been completing, if you've got to down tools for 48 hours and get ready for the review meeting, then something's actually wrong in the process and the work that you're putting together for the review. A review, certainly in my mind, shouldn't need a whole creation of extra spreadsheets. It should be a review of the work that's taking place at this moment in time, that's already well planned out with gates of its own. And it just resonated with me with the way that your crisis management was being illustrated, Harvey.
No, I mean, I think that's absolutely right, Andrew. I wouldn't say that there will never be any specific prep for presentation material, but it certainly shouldn't create a little industry of itself. But I think what we're really arguing is around making sure that we are better organized for that upfront stage. I mean, here's an example I use a lot on some of the other public courses around new product introduction and design for manufacture, that looks at the potential for having a really good upfront phase to reduce the amount of rework in terms of design, in terms of quality maturation, to get to a product quicker and at higher quality. And a lot of analysis says on typical projects where they're not working effectively, that rework can be anything up to 40% of the development cost. And this is a real life example from the computer printer manufacturer Lexmark, where they achieved a 40% effort saving, but only because they hugely increased the amount of effort and resource and time they devoted to this upfront stuff. And making reviews effective is very much part of that. So the more we can use a structured approach of which reviews are part, the more we can reduce rework. Because we get in a typical badly executed project, we get this. If we look the little graph here, the left-hand axis is the volume of product or process changes. We get these big blips when we switch on production at some sort of reasonable volume. We get a blip that means we need to come and do a lot of changes. We put the product on sale, and we all know customers find ways to break products that even the best development program can't catch out. We get a lot of changes. And we're working towards an ideal where we drive that sort of change much earlier in the program by putting that level of upfront effort in. And with that, we don't get the time pressure and the costs associated with later changes. And I guess all of that's by way of saying that as well as improving time, and it allows us to improve the quality of what we do. If we encourage input from that much wider range of participants, and I know one or two people have commented on the challenges of getting sort of manufacturing people involved right at this very early stage, but I think where that can be done, we get a much better quality product because we can disseminate and transfer knowledge. We can capture and learn from the mistakes we've made on previous projects, and as I mentioned in my introduction, that was a key part of the last role I did in IMechE, was to make sure that some of the issues that the first generation IMechE had created were resolved and not replicated in the second one. And finally, all of that goes to create a better level of collaboration, by involving all these other players. And we're talking about reviews here, but I'm thinking much more generally, not just at the review stage, but as part of the overall development process. Gets buy-in, improves sense of ownership, equally fosters real interfunctional, cross-functional understanding, so people really get a better sense of the dependencies between all these different activities. And I can't think many of you sitting out there are going to argue with me that those sort of benefits aren't worth having. And yet I can equally imagine that a lot of you are thinking, well, the reviews that are happening in our organisation just don't really deliver those benefits. And some of the comments that we've already seen are confirming that. Because I think the other important thing to say is just having the reviews isn't enough. It's not just about showing up, having the reviews in the calendar. There's a lot of factors that we need to think about to make sure that the reviews actually achieve their goal. First thing to say is that a great review doesn't make up for a poor design and development process. So if your NPI process, your design development process isn't good, the fact that you've organised a great review will just highlight that process hasn't done a great job. So a good design review process or great review process or whatever it is has to be part of an overall new product introduction, product lifecycle process, whatever your organisation calls it, that is designed to ensure that the reviews happen effectively. So to get the benefits from a review, to get those benefits, reviews have to be well prepared, well executed, and equally there has to be a great level of follow-up after the review. And what we're going to do in the next stage is look at each of those in turn and just pick out one or two key ingredients. Let's start with the preparation stage. Yep, the stuff that's obvious. There's some fairly obvious mechanical stuff. You can get this from the British Standard that says we need an agenda. that actually sets expectations ahead of the review, makes it clear what preparations are required of people and what the purpose of the review is going to be. We need to make sure that we get the right information out to people in advance, in good time, so that people who are perhaps reviewing get an opportunity to study stuff in advance. Obviously, back to my earlier point, they've got to have the right mindset, but they come along with the right questions, the right input that actually will help the review deliver its objectives. We've got to have the right people at the review. So, I think as we talk about the mindset, we talk about the attitudes and behaviours and conduct in reviews, that leads us to think about having the right people in the review, both from their technical knowledge, ability, and so on, the right level of representation from different disciplines, but also are they going to approach that review in the right way, in a way that's going to allow the reviewers and the presenters to get the most value out of it. And there's also thinking about those people that have to conduct the review, make sure it runs smoothly. Whatever you call the person, the chair, the facilitator, whatever, the person who will take the notes, are they there and well prepared and well equipped to make the review happen properly? And have we got the right venue and facilities? Is there enough simple things like space, light, to get discussion in formal and informal times like breaks? Have we got the right facilities for presentation and display? Simple things like, have we got refreshments laid on? Is anybody bringing biscuits? Even down to the right stationery for note taking, if it's post-it notes or whatever, have we got all the stuff we need? And back to a point I saw coming in the comments, have we got the right amount of time to get the outcomes that we want? In other words, I've been in reviews where the agenda's been rushed, or we've only got part way through before everyone's to dash off because we've either tried to fit too much into the review, or we've not allowed it enough time for the agenda and the content that has been set. So hopefully that stuff's fairly obvious and mechanical. But I just want to come back to the mindset point that I made earlier on, that says, how do people see their role? So I'm thinking the presenter mindset really needs to be that I'm here to explain what I've done and why I've done it. I'm not here to be defensive. I think if we talked about some of the attitudes to coming into the review at the beginning, with some of those negatives about I'm here to be judged, people might feel the need to be defensive. And that to me gets in the way of learning and improving the design. Because the other key bit of the presenter mindset is I'm here to learn. I'm actually here to get feedback so that I can improve what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. Similarly, from the reviewer point of view, the reviewer mindset needs to be I'm here to add value. I'm not here to find fault in what someone's done. And I think this whole fault mentality is something that really gets in the way. I see that so often. So it's about the reviewer trying to be objective, make decisions, not to say I'm going to get it done my way rather than the way of the person who's doing the presentation. So it's important that reviewers are there to look at all the different perspectives presented rather than trying to force things.
Russell's made a really pertinent point, I think, at this stage here, that if reviews are objective-based, then the criteria is clear. It should be quite easy to take the subjective, the emotional feelings away from things. There's almost the opportunity to scorecard some of the results that we already want and then test where we're at. We can move away from personal opinions, perhaps, in that way.
It's a great point. And I think that's a really important place to come from. And we kind of debate something like this in the longer courses. And it still comes down to, at some point, though, however good those criteria are, with something as complex as a product design, there's always room for different opinions and different ways of achieving the same result. And I think an important part from the reviewer mindset is to say, even though this way that's presented is going to be different from what I would do, is it just as good at achieving the result that we want? Yep. So
Yeah, absolutely, Harvey. Perfectly put. Thank you.
Yeah. And then finally, what's the role of the facilitator? To me, the best reviews are where the person who's facilitating is independent of the process, so doesn't have a stake in the outcome other than to ensure that the process is well managed, that everyone has a voice, and not to force the discussion or dominate the discussion to move it in a particular direction. Yep. So I just wanted to give people a few seconds pause at this point before we move on to the next section to think about whether there's anywhere in the stuff we presented and talked about so far that they might need to improve, because it can be very easy to look at other people in the organisation and spot where they need to do things differently. And I think that's really hard, isn't it, trying to change other people? Much easier in some ways to change ourselves, and maybe not always as easy to look at ourselves and think how we need to change. So I'm just going to pause for a minute or two.
Harvey, I can pick up something that has just dropped into the box. Really, there's a message about culture.
Yes.
And I think that I have personal experience of reviews that were a contest, and deliberately so. I can remember walking in a food manufacturing industry, walking in to see product technicians, really capable people. And as you walk through the door from a marketing point of view, you would be greeted by 7 people with white coats on, all with their arms folded, just waiting for some type of weakness, I think, in the presenter. And I think culture just does play a big part. And I think at that point, the way we used to handle that was that we actually used to call it out, and we used to refer to the fact that this feels more like a contest than a group of people who are trying to get the product to market. But that for example is one example of mine where the process, the people who were in the room did not feel part of a team. Maybe they were remotely connected. Maybe some of them didn't have any ownership in actually getting this to market. But that type of thing always made it more difficult to get a decent result that you wanted.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. And I think being very explicit about trying to identify and tackle some of those behavioural, cultural issues is a really important part of making the sort of improvements we're talking about. I noticed there's a couple of comments here in the chat box about maybe the reviewers having a pre-briefing, and certainly with the company we've been working with, they're considering whether we actually develop some specific development material to equip people to be more effective at doing that reviewer role. So I'd very much support that. Just getting a little bit conscious of time, Andrew, in terms of getting to the point where we allow people to engage a bit more with the Q&A at the end as well. So if you're okay, we'll move on to the next section.
Yeah, absolutely.
To think about what's important in terms of the execution, the carrying out of the review. And I want to chuck in one fundamental idea and a couple of skills that I think are really important. And here it is, one real key principle that I've come up with over the years that I think is more significant than any other, and it is this: that within the review there are no surprises. How often have you been in a review or any sort of meeting where someone's just dropped a bombshell? They've chucked a grenade into the middle of the meeting, it's gone off, and the meeting just goes off in a completely different direction. You get all sorts of difficult reactions. It can almost seem like they're willfully trying to sabotage the session. And I'm thinking, how is that in any way helpful? Surely it's far better to disclose information or concerns in advance so that those attending, whether they're on the presentation side or the reviewing side or wherever they are, to be well prepared to have a meaningful discussion that will help move things forward and determine what's the best action to take, rather than creating a lot of noise and uncertainty. I love that. Yeah, somebody say absolutely yes, like it. So let's think about a couple of key skills that go alongside that. And I think key skill number one is asking really great questions. Because if what we're trying to do in the review is encourage thoughtful response, what gets a thoughtful response better than a really good question? So questions that are seeking to grow your understanding, to explore points of view, to explore issues raised, to clarify why things have been done a particular way, to me is a really powerful way of getting a great deal more learning and understanding about how a design or a product has got to a particular point, what's led it to be there, what are some of the challenges that might still be there, and so on. And honestly, we could do a whole section just on how to use questions really well. But today I want to make a bit more time for a skill that I've come to believe is even more important than asking questions. So I'm just going to challenge you for now that says whenever in any sort of review or meeting, the next time you come, set yourself a goal that instead of making a comment or overlaying what's been said with your opinion, think of a really good open question to ask instead and see what that does to the quality of the conversation. Now, so what's this other key skill? And I think the other key skill is simply this. It's to get great feedback, because feedback to me is the key to making improvements. Yeah. So feedback with a sense that it's useful to learn and improve. And yet I think it's one where we probably all admit, at least to ourselves, if not to others, that maybe we're not as good at that as we'd like to be. Yeah, so all too often our ability to give or receive feedback is influenced by our feelings, and that can make it really hard to step back and be more effective. And my colleague Eddie Winton did a whole webinar on feedback a while back, might even be a couple of years ago now, but I know that that you can access that in the archive if you want to go even deeper into that session that I'm going to do today. But here's a few key principles that I've picked up over time and have really helped me in this particular area. The first thing, and this really surprised me when I heard it, was that we can become really good at giving feedback and it may not make the difference we think. You know, a lot of leadership training, personal development training focuses on how we give better feedback. But it doesn't always work. Now, of course, that doesn't mean how feedback is given doesn't make a difference, because it surely does. Doesn't mean you can say what you like. So you need to make feedback objective and specific with examples. They need to be sensitive to the person receiving. But about a year ago, I came across this material from Doug Stone and Sheila Heen. I heard Sheila Heen speak at a conference, and they revealed a surprising fact about their research. They're both lawyers who'd worked on something called the Harvard Negotiation Project. And they become fascinated by this whole topic of feedback and its contribution. And had spent a long time looking at the whole topic of how people give better feedback, and it wasn't making the difference they thought. And what they realized, their light bulb moment, was actually it's not as much how feedback is given, but it's how it's received that makes the bigger difference. And actually the thing we should be focusing on is becoming better receivers of feedback, because that's something we can all work on for ourselves. So here's my top hints and tips about feedback. First thing is to have the right mindset, because I think too often we take feedback as personal criticism and challenge, don't we? And so the one thing to do is to set aside the "it's about me" thing. So it's about having the confidence in what we've already done, and having the humility to accept feedback, having a mindset that says, I'm actually here to learn. Yeah. So I need a mindset of curiosity, of openness. And the key thing I learned, and this was a while ago, is feedback is only information. It's up to me to choose what I do with it. Yeah. Feedback is only information. It's up to me what I choose to do with it. So therefore we need an approach that says, okay, our goal if we're getting feedback is to seek to understand what the other person's trying to tell me. Because it may seem and feel like criticism. It may feel like they're attacking us. It may feel like they're challenging our professional competence. But actually it might just be they're not very good at giving feedback and they've actually got something really important to say. And even if they are having a go, how does it help by sort of counter-attacking or whatever? So again, it's back to asking questions. I talked about the importance of questions a few minutes ago. Asking questions rather than defending your position, because that means you will get potentially greater understanding and see whether there is anything of value in what they're trying to say. So good questions here could be, so what do you mean by that exactly? What led you to that conclusion? What might you like to see that's different? And I think maybe just adopting that subtle approach, that subtly different but significantly different approach, can kind of stop arguments brewing up and flaring up, keep the whole session much calmer, much more objective. We talked about objectivity earlier, and equally will give you potentially, as the questioner, as the person being given the feedback, additional insight. Now I know it's really not easy to do. It's one of these things that it's one of these theories that it's great to understand, and yet even now, I came to some of these realizations 20, 30 years ago, and I still catch myself reacting and defending what I've done because it just triggers that emotional thing. So I think it's something that we all need to work on. But I think if we can create that culture of giving and choosing feedback. I love this comment here I just noticed from James that said feedback's a gift. Absolutely, James, isn't it brilliant? And you can choose to accept it or reject it. And I think that is so important to getting the right culture and atmosphere and environment in a review that says we're all there to learn. Feedback is offered with good intention, and that it will help us produce better products. So how are we doing? Yeah, good. So on to the final section, and then we'll come back for some more comments and questions. I just wanted to say a couple of things about follow-up. Again, some of the sort of formal, relatively obvious stuff should be that says, our actions, recommendations and decisions documented. So are the notes that are taken accurate? And equally, are they issued in timely manner? How often do you wait weeks and weeks and weeks for the notes from meetings to be issued? And I'm not saying here you want sort of like Hansard style notes of exactly who said what, when and to who and so on, because actually that's just lots of words, and maybe better is just a simple bullet point record key points. But really important is getting them out quickly after the meeting, or even better, recorded during the meeting so everyone can see what's written down. Back in the day we used to use electronic whiteboards. More recently people can sit there with a laptop and a projector and actually be taking the notes so that everybody's seeing what's being recorded, checking what's written is what they really meant, so we actually get a record of the meeting. And make sure that, I think a lot of companies are very bad at actually being really sharp about actions. We know about SMART objectives, SMART goals, SMART actions, and yet a lot of the time we don't even get as good as writing down what's the action, who's doing it, and when's it to be done by. Yeah. But clearly actions coming out of review are things that people agree have to be done, or should agree have to be done. Because the other type of comment that can come out of review is a recommendation. So a recommendation will be something we should consider. It's not a must do. This can be particularly about consider potential design changes, different ways of looking at a design, and so. So with those, the recording has got to include the context and the rationale, but equally has the possibility that that recommendation can be rejected. It's not a must-do action, but it probably is something that must be reviewed, must be there's some sort of resolution, there must be a response, but that response should have an explanation. And then the record of what's going to happen can be updated so that the review notes actually confirm what was decided as a result of that recommendation. And where necessary, the acceptance of that conclusion, I guess, has to be confirmed, or it may need some further action. Okay, now finally, I guess to wrap this up, the whole topic of lessons learned. Again, I noticed a few comments about this earlier on in the chat box that says, you know, lessons learned doesn't work necessarily in lots of organisations. And to me, some of that is about what's the timing of lessons learned. You know, I've worked with lots of companies, and it's certainly true in Rover Group back in the day, that we did the lessons learned event kind of after the product was in production and it had all settled down, and maybe it was part of a final gate review, I don't know. And I'm thinking, actually, I have enough trouble remembering what happened yesterday. You know, so people can struggle to remember, or at least remember with enough detail, stuff that happened weeks or even months ago. And therefore, surely it's much better to actually have lessons learned as part of your ongoing process so that we capture issues when they happen. That reflection and learning from that record is then what we do at each review point. And if we then decide what we need to do differently, we can be clear about the purpose of the expected outcome of the changes we make. And if we adopt I'm assuming everybody mostly knows what PDCA stands for, Plan, Do, Check, Act. If we make a change or an improvement to our review process or our NPI process as a whole, we actually have some mechanism in place to see whether that achieves the improvement that we expect, and if not, what do we need to adjust in terms of that. Yeah, and that to me is Plan, Do, Check, Act in action. And we need, excuse me.
Harvey, let me pick up a little bit while you're restoring your throat. So a lovely couple of comments coming in towards the end of a vast stream of information. And by the way, I think the interaction today has been terrific between all of the people who've attended this webinar, Harvey. The amount of discussion that's gone on between them alongside the work that you've been doing has really been pretty admirable, considering this is very, very remote and that people don't know each other. There's been some really great sharing. There's a marvellous marvellous comment about the fact that, Denise, I think you've said you've renamed lessons learned process improvements due to the groan that the title lessons learned always received. I think I think that's a really good piece of thinking. If you're ever getting anything that for some reason or other people take objection to in a simple title, then have a think about turning it around. And I'm sure that process improvement really works for you there. That comes through loud and clear. And I like this idea. Sorry, Harvey, go on.
No, I was going to say that's spot on. I mean, I call it lessons learned in quotes because it really isn't, is it? And I think the comments made there and opportunities for improvement is, or process improvements probably is a much more apt definition of it.
Absolutely perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. So just to round this off, and then we'll get to the Q&A, is to think about how we do this. You know, and I come back to this whole idea of having standards and checklists. You know, it's another one where people groan, but actually the simple, humble checklist to me is one of the most powerful tools we have for making sure we capture our learning and ensure that we apply stuff to our subsequent projects. You know, because within those, the standards, the normal ways, standardized ways of working, within the checklists that we build around that, that's like our way of accumulating knowledge of what we've learned over time. It's a way to make sure, or at least maximize the chances that stuff isn't left out. And if people have not read the top book here, the Checklist Manifesto, it's by a guy called Attendees, who was actually a surgeon, worked for the World Health Organization, and he looked at the value of checklists in making sure that procedures in operating theatres worked really well, and he's probably got the best explanation of to the value and culture and process you need for making checklists and stuff work for you, because at the end of the day, it's another one of these things that just having them isn't the thing. You know, they're either powerful or worthless depending on how they're used. Powerful if they're used consistently, referred to diligently, updated regularly, they're the best thing there. If they sit on the shelf and don't get used, don't get updated, complete and utter waste of time. So, you know, that kind of closes it off, because those checklists then become the basis of the activity that drives the next project, that drives the next review, so that it becomes more and more effective. So there we go. I mean, in the 50 minutes we've had or so, probably not enough time to cover every aspect in every detail. And like Andrew, I've kind of noticed, probably not reading them as much as Andrew has, all the little comments flickering up, and it does seem like there's been some really good stuff going on there, and I shall look forward to reading through those after the event, because I'll get a transcript of all of that. Just wanted to say that there are some references that we can give you. Those are the details of the sort of books and articles that I've referred to as we've gone through the session. And also maybe to try and set this topic in the context of all of the overall material we offer around this whole product lifecycle thing. You can see that the Improving Design Reviews course is very much a sort of deep dive into one specific aspect, and we've got a lot of other materials around this whole product lifecycle thing that run, and there are a couple of those coming up in the very near future. These three are the courses that I run. So I mentioned that the design review stuff came out of some training we developed for one particular company, and we've made that into a 2-day open course that's running in London next month. The new product introduction course that covers the whole end-to-end process runs in June, and then in Coventry, not in London, another deep dive day looking at how we set up for design for manufacturability. So at this point I'm going to hand back to Andrew, who's going to mention what's going to happen with the next webinar coming up, and then open the thing up to some questions that have come up through the chat as we've gone on. Andrew, back over to you.
Thank you, Harvey. Yes, we'll make sure that you can see that you have been given links to see some other training courses that are coming forward. You're also given links to the archive of our webinars, and you can, if you sign up there, you can make sure that you are online, as it were, with all the things that are coming up in front of us. And I just wanted to speak quickly about this next one. By all means, get online. Understanding Company Finances, a guide to financial reports. What I can promise you is that isn't dry or uninteresting, or should I say, it isn't in my view. It talks significantly about the application of money in business, and I think it's a pretty critical understanding for all of us, because at some time or other, if we're not doing it already, we need to go and ask for money to finance our projects, and we need to be able to talk in the same language as the people who hold the purse strings. Harvey, that will be me done. One thing I just wanted to move on to very quickly, there was a great question a bit back, and I can see that people are starting to drift away from us at the moment, and not unreasonably. We're right on time. But it's just something I'd like you to comment on. I have my own views on this, is how do you cope if you actually haven't done the work yourself? If you've employed an outside contractor to be part of this review, would you invite them to the review? Maybe they can or they can't get there. How do you actually approach this use of a wider team than necessarily, wider than even your company? What's the approach that you would take there?
I mean, I think there's two important things to say there, Andrew. One is it's not just about the review. It's about the way that you would engage that outside contractor in the whole process. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because, you know, if they're sort of like kept at arm's length and effectively get issued a specification, have to work to that specification, provide a design or a component back, that interaction isn't taking place in any context. And if you then invite them to the review, to my mind, that's almost too late, because it's more a case of then we find all the things that were got missed in the earlier process, rather than actually just confirming that we've done a good job. And to me, it's far more important that says involve those external parties as much as it makes sense to do so in the whole process. I mean, you know, even 25 years ago, we had what we then called guest engineers from our component module suppliers sitting inside our project teams, almost as part of day-to-day business, and therefore they were inherently part of the review.
Yeah.
Now I know that there are commercial reasons that mean not all organisations can do that as early as you might like, but as a principle, that's where I would start.
Yeah, I think that undoubtedly making people feel part of this and definitely not feel outside of it. Harvey, that's a really good way of looking at it. In the end, it's about ownership and responsibility, and not people not having to get ready because they intrinsically know these answers deep inside them because they're the ones who are doing the work. So thank you very much indeed for that. I can see that there's a couple of requests coming in for the slides. We posted a link right at the start, and I'll ask Rachel to post it again, please, so that you could drop into these slides. You're welcome to have them. And finally, we've got, I think, we've got one question that will probably take us right through to the last bit. Harvey, how would you recommend balancing the need for tailoring small projects rather than actually cutting corners? The questioner the questioner in question, please excuse me, there are so many things coming in, I keep losing what I'm reading, which I think is probably a very good, I think it's probably a very good sign. How do you balance the need for tailoring and rather making sure that it's not cutting corners, that this person's found in a huge defence company?
Yeah,
tailoring, you've got it as well.
Yeah, but I'm not 100% sure I understand it, so let me take a guess at it. And if it doesn't answer your question, please come back to us, and I can maybe follow it up by email. If you send a comment in here, I'm sure Rachel can connect us, and I can respond by email. But I think if by cut corners, you mean how can we make the design review burden less? Where I'm thinking is that the principles are what matters here. The idea of what we're trying to achieve by way of a review, in terms of it's an opportunity for another body to take an objective view that provides some additional input, that provides opportunity to learn and improve the design. Then it's not so much about how big or small you make the agenda. It's about, have we created that opportunity in a way that is appropriate for the scale and complexity of the product that we're working on. So it might be in that case it's just one small design review. It might be in your big defense company with multi-project or very complex products that you end up with a number of smaller scale design reviews that feed into a bigger one that then feeds into a big gate review or whatever. So I think if it's done well, if the principles apply, whether you're doing really small or really big, and it's about scale and structure and organisation in a way that's appropriate. And I don't know if that was really what you were getting at, but that was my best shot. And if it's not that, pop an email to the address that Rachel's put up there, and ask a more specific question, and I'll get back to you.
And Harvey, thank you. We're bang on. We've just turned 1:30 now. Just to say thank you to everybody for participating. Please do, as Harvey said, if there's anything we missed as we scroll through things, please let us know if you want an answer to something specific. I hope you won't be surprised because we look for our own lessons learned. We will read everything that's in there again. There will be three of us who take this apart to make sure that we've tried to give something that, one, you enjoy, and two, you can take something straight away and do something with it. So thank you for the great comments that we've had. And can I say, we will judge feedback either positive or negative. I understand there's often no negative feedback. There's only constructive feedback. But we will judge it in exactly the same way, and we'll keep trying to do these better, and we'll keep trying to encourage you to join us. You can see that there is a link right at the end of the chat box which can take you through to everything you want. Please don't forget, if there's anything specific, contact us. We'd love to talk to you. We might meet up with you again on the Understanding Company Finances. Harvey, from me, thank you very, very much indeed for this.
No, thanks to Andrew for guiding me through and keeping me on track.
And Rachel in the centre at Birdcage Walk up in London has made sure that all of the technology works and that we keep ourselves in order by answering as many questions as we could. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I hope you have a great rest of the day, and we hope to be in contact with you soon. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, everybody. Bye-bye now.